Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are coming to you live from the Institute for Pastoral Community Engagement, the IPCE. This is another one of our great programs that we're bringing to you this afternoon. Today is Sunday, May the 16th, and I have with me in the studio at this time Pastor Nathanael Gracia, pastor for Francophone churches here in the Metro Atlanta area. In just a little bit, you're going to hear from Pastor Gracia as he introduces the program for this afternoon. But before we get there, I'd like to bring you greetings from the Metro Atlanta area. And we thank you that you have given us some space in your schedule this afternoon as we bring to you, especially our pastors, our Seventh-day Adventist pastors who are watching this both live as well as some future time on our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, in our Facebook group. IPCE is set up, founded in September last year, 2020, to bring training, awareness, and equipping to our colleagues across the North American division, especially here in the United States. There's so many issues that are relative to the gospel ministry as we seek to reach people at the grassroots level. And there are issues that they face on a day-to-day basis that we have come to recognize unless we help people with the struggles, the issues, the challenges, the problems that they face on a day-to-day basis. There's hardly any point trying to tell them about the coming of Jesus and about the glories of heaven. People are interested in knowing how to navigate, how to survive the issues today. A future time in the unknown distant future is all right to talk about from a prophetic perspective, but people want to know, what can you do to help me right now? I'm dealing with these issues. I've got some marital issues. I've got some financial issues. I've got some legal challenges. I want to know, what are my rights? People are trying to tell me I can't vote because of this, that, and the other. I'm trying to get a job, and because of my religious convictions, I find difficulties in getting an accommodation on religious grounds. What are my rights? What are some of the things that you all as church people can help me with today? My family is struggling. And so that's why we set up IPCE, because we have come to recognize it's not enough to know Hebrew and Greek and know how to use the mechanics of homiletics and preaching. We've got to know how to reach the people on the street. We have brought to you this afternoon an exciting program. I'm excited to bring Pastor Nathanael Gracia on right now. He is, as I mentioned, one of our pastors here in the South Atlantic Conference and an officer of IPCE. Pastor Gracia, welcome to the program this afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Ennis. Thank you. And I am so grateful for your ministry, your leadership, and what you're doing in our community. Why is relevant? I remember 21 years ago, when I started my internship at the St. Anne's Bay district, a member approached me and said, Pastor, I need a letter for my workplace. I did not even know what to put in it. They don't teach us those things at seminar, what to put in a letter, how to write it, those things for a job letter. And I wish we had you and the Institute so we can have resources that can help us. Things that inherent to our leadership and that makes us better servants, and that's what we are here for. And today again, I will say, people keep on asking, can I have a letter because I don't want to take the vaccine? So it is very relevant. People come for various reasons and believe that once they get that letter, they should be hired. It does not matter. So we are so glad that we can have this platform to help with religious liberty. As you said in your intro, it is important for you to know your rights. You have heard that before. Know your rights. Let us learn this afternoon our rights and our limits, because we do have limits.
Correct.
We are not the government. We are just pastors. But as pastors, we shepherd, as you mentioned. What are the things we can do to help our congregations? So today, we got someone who is a loving soul, someone who is in the legal arena, but she's an example of a Christian. When you approach her, you can see God through her, and this is very important. And I've been to Pearl and listened to her, and I said, this is somebody who can convey a message with passion and love. Our guest speaker today, as I introduce her, with a great blessing coming on us today, it's Amira Al Haddad. She is the Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the Southern Union Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. Previously, she holds a bachelor's degree in history from Atlantic Union College. She's also a certificate paralegal, having graduated from the Southeastern Paralegal Institute in Nashville, Tennessee. While attending paralegal school, she interned in the General Civil Department at the Tennessee State Attorney General office in Nashville. This is someone who has been there, knows it when it comes to the legal matters. She came to the Southern Union in 1992 and has worked as the associate director for many years. She has a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge, and also she has that passion to serve and help people. When it is said in Christ, we have a lawyer. The lawyer is someone to take you out of trouble. So that's what we understand from her legal background. She is very warm. Amira was elected in the departmental director in September 2006, overseeing and heading up the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Department is fast-paced and exciting to her because of her personality. Some of the issues she deals with, and you will hear of them, include Sabbath accommodation, Sabbath accommodation problems, legislative issues throughout the whole Southern Union, current public events that relates to religious liberty, and the church. She also oversees managing the Southern Union Liberty magazine subscriptions and the religious liberty offering. This is someone who has a lot of responsibility, but she took the time to help us to be better this evening. So we welcome the one and only Southern Union Public Religious Affairs Director, who will now present to us what are our limits, what are our rights as Adventist pastors in our communities. Welcome, Amira.
Thank you so much. It is great to be here. Thank you, Pastor Garcia, for inviting me. And I hope that I can impart a little bit of wisdom when it comes to religious liberty for the pastors who are joining in to watch this today. We've had quite a year over the last 18 months when it comes to religious liberty issues. I think as of all the time that I've been in the religious liberty department, we have never had quite such a busy year. We've never seen so many religious liberty lawsuits being filed. We've never had such a contentious time in the courts and in the public square when it came to religious liberty and what we would do. I know a lot of church members right now are kind of divided on the COVID issue. And I know that they're divided on whether they should go to church or stay home and be safe. We have had lots of questions about whether or not churches should be closed or be open. And, part of the answer is a religious liberty answer, and part of the answer is a theological answer. I know that many of our conferences here in the Southern Union, and we incorporate 8 states and 8 conferences. We are dealing with 8 different governmental entities when it comes to church closures. We're dealing sometimes with municipal, the city governments. We're dealing with the county governments and what rules or restrictions they may have on your church opening. And so this is a lot of levels. It becomes like an onion with layer after layer of issues to have to deal through. The good thing is this: the Supreme Court has slowly over the last year been upholding religious liberty rights. They've been upholding the First Amendment. And we have seen a switch from the first time the court heard cases where they said, look, this is the good of the community. You have to stay shut. You have to stay closed. Now we're seeing the switch with the Supreme Court saying, well, no, if you're going to start opening back up the community, you can't keep the churches closed. So the difference in what's going on is how the government was treating all entities. So in the beginning of the pandemic, the government said everything has to close. Casinos have to close. Sports arenas have to close. Churches have to close. Funeral homes have to close. All but essential businesses have to close. And in those situations, the governments were not treating religion differently than anybody else. So for religious liberty advocates, there weren't a whole lot of big religious liberty concerns because everything was kind of being treated the same. What happens is the government started opening things up, but now the government decided that they were going to use a value judgment on whether or not things would be open or not. So a good example of that was the state of Nevada, where a lot of the income of Nevada, the tax dollars that run the state government in Nevada, come from casinos and gambling. And so what did Nevada do? Nevada said that casinos could open, but churches couldn't. Now you have a problem because now churches are being treated differently, that they are being imposed upon. And so it is right for the government to come back and say, look, you can't open casinos and allow 1,000 people in a casino, but only allow 50 people in a church. You can't do that. Now you have a religious liberty problem. And so we've seen over the course of the months as they've gone by, we've seen different rulings from the Supreme Court. And I think that at each stage, the Supreme Court has been correct in the way that they have ruled so far. Within the Seventh-day Adventist community for our denomination, the state didn't really close any of our churches. Our churches volunteered to close. I know in my hometown of Atlanta, our church closed before there was an order to close. And we did that because we are concerned for our church members. We want our church members to be safe. We knew that this was a virus that spread through droplets in contact with other human beings. And so we took the initiative as a self-autonomous entity to say, look, we're going to decide on our own whether our churches will be open or shut. And so here we had a lot of church members who said, well, God will protect us. And here's where we come to the theology part, the theology part of the issue. We don't say God will protect us from everything and we're not going to do anything to protect ourselves. I mean, it's why we have healthful living. It's why we exercise. It's why we sleep enough hours, because we know all of these things make us healthy. We don't just say, well, God will make us healthy if we do nothing. We don't say that. We don't presume that God will do anything. We trust in God, but we don't presume upon him. And so that's a little bit different from, in a theological sense, where we have come from as a denomination in the way we regard issues, scientific issues like the spread of germs and viruses, and the way we have closed during COVID. So we've come to a point now where we've gotten through the initial, phases of church closings, and churches have slowly started to open, but not all of our churches are open still. And people say, well, we want our church to be open. Well, there's a very good way to get churches open quickly, and that is to get the vaccine. So now we have another religious liberty problem, because now we've gone from church closings to wanting churches open to the issue of vaccination. And if you look at the history of vaccination, you're always going to find that there have always been people in society that objected to vaccines. It's just that they didn't have the internet to spread the news that they were objecting to vaccines. So there has always been a very small segment of society who have objected. We have a growing segment of society now who are objecting to the vaccine. But I think that it's important that we as church leaders inform and be informed about vaccines and the history of vaccines, the history of our church's approach to vaccines. Our health institutions have always been in favor of vaccinations. This is science, and it's something that we have incorporated into a healthy lifestyle for our community. The General Conference released a statement in December about vaccinations. And the vaccination statement that the church has is not a new statement. That vaccination statement has been around for years. But what the General Conference did was it incorporated a statement that also looked at the science behind the new vaccine, and also the internet rumors and the conspiracy theories about whether or not taking the vaccine was part of the mark of the beast, and how the vaccine played into our end time apocalyptic scenario. And so we have, as leaders, have to be clear, and we have to explain to our church members our true understanding of prophecy. We have to let people know that the mark of the beast is not a physical mark. It is a symbol of allegiance to a threefold false beast power. We have to let our church members understand the science behind the vaccine. The two vaccines that were first approved, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, those two vaccines are different than any other vaccine that people have taken in the past. And the way that they are different is that they are synthesized mRNA messenger not genes, but messenger virus codes. They're synthesized codes that have no, I'm trying to think of the right word. They don't have any animal products in them. They don't have any preservatives in them. There are no, people are always concerned, are there stem cells? No, there are no stem cells in them. I should probably back up when I'm talking about stem cells. And let me first say this, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, but I have looked at the issue of stem cells. And I think that a lot of church members are not knowledgeable about what the stem cell research is about. I've had a couple of church members who have been objecting to the vaccines because they thought there was stem cells. There are none in these two vaccines that we're talking about. But even if there were, the one religious entity that totally objects to stem cell research is the Catholic Church. And even the Catholic Church has approved these two vaccines. And when it comes to vaccinations, the Catholic Church's philosophy is, try to find one that doesn't have stem cells, but if you can't, then go ahead and take it because it's for the good of society. Now, let's back up again on stem cells. when we're talking about stem cells for vaccination studies, we need to understand that these are generation and generation of human growth cells at this point. The history of the stem cells that are used in research today goes back to before I was born, and maybe before some of you were born. The two donors for the stem cells that are grown in labs and used throughout the scientific community came from an aborted fetus from the 1960s and from the very early 1970s. Only two. Those two aborted fetuses aren't even in existence anymore. They're not around. What is happening is that human growth hormones were started from those fetuses, and they have been propagated over generation and generation and generation. We're talking thousands of generations of stem cell growth in the lab now. And so what we're really talking about when they're using or testing stem cells is we're talking about human growth cells that are being grown in the laboratory from something that hasn't been around for decades. So I just want people to know that that this isn't a matter of people are aborting fetuses to get stem cells. No, this isn't an ongoing, this is why abortion is bad kind of thing. This happened a long time ago, and this is just what's being grown in the labs today. So just a little clarification on that, because I don't think a lot of people understand or know. So the question is, what do we do if a church member wants to come and say, I'm not going to take the vaccine? Well, if you're in the United States, the good news is that the vaccine has not been mandated in the United States. There hasn't really been any talk about mandating the vaccine, and the federal government doesn't really have the power to mandate the vaccine. So if the vaccine gets mandated, the probability that the mandate will come from the federal government is very, very small. It's almost 0.01%. It's so small. The more likely mandate would come from state governments, if a state government wanted to mandate the vaccine. But we still haven't seen that. We've had some talk about whether you can travel if you're vaccinated or not. We haven't seen anything come forward on that as well. I think that they're really trying to get people to take the vaccine so that everything can return back to normal, is what they're trying to do. And they're not trying to push it upon people. In the past, people just kind of did what was good for the community and got vaccinated. We pulled together as a community and got vaccinated. Now, everyone wants to politicize it. People want to politicize religious liberty. They want to politicize the vaccine. And really, our health should not be politicized. This is about health. This is about longevity for some people who would die if they weren't vaccinated and didn't get the vaccine. It's about a return to normal for us, going back to church, worshiping. It's about us being able to evangelize with other people, sharing the gospel with others. And so I think it's important. The Religious Liberty Department is currently not giving vaccination letter exemptions for people with religious objections. And the reason for that, and we're telling our pastors, it's up to you if you want to, but we're recommending that you really find out why the individual doesn't want it. Because number one, the church does not teach not to vaccinate. So our church does not teach this. It's not a religious belief that we espouse. The second thing is that it's not even part of our apocalyptic or our prophetic understanding. So this also doesn't count. And the third thing is that we don't want to abuse religious liberty rights. So it's okay for a church member to say, I object to taking the vaccine. I don't want the government to tell me what to put into my body. That's okay. let's be honest and say nobody wants the government telling them what to do with their body. But on the flip side of that, we have to let our church members know we cannot use religion as an excuse, because it's wrong to abuse religious liberty rights. And that's the thing that we're the most concerned about, is that we don't want people abusing religious liberty rights. When you look around the world at world religions, there is no dominant world religion that teaches not to vaccinate. Even if the vaccine has pork products in it, Muslims and Jews still take those vaccines. Why do they do that? This is another thing that we need to let church members know. It is because that there's a difference between consuming and eating unclean meat and using a rarefied, medically cleansed, I guess that's, kind of the generic way to say this, but it's been rarefied so that the things that make it unclean aren't going to affect us in the medicine. And so if you're not eating it, all these other world religions say that there's a difference. And Seventh-day Adventists acknowledge that difference as well. If we didn't, our church members who had heart valve replacements wouldn't have a heart valve replacement, because most heart valves are pig valves. And so I've never had a church member say they didn't want a heart valve replacement because of that. So, we just have to make sure that we're listening to ourselves and not crazy things on the internet that have no validity or have no backing. You can say anything you want to on the internet. It doesn't mean that it's right. But we want to approach this in a way that makes sense to everybody. So, and then the other thing, of course, I talked about writing letters for the vaccines, which we're not doing in my department. We decided not to. But also remember that we're here to support you as a pastor, and that there may be other things that you need to write a letter for, like a Sabbath accommodation letter. We're happy to help you. We have form letters that we can help you use for the church members for that initial starting out phase. We have letters for church members who are coming in and being naturalized. When you become a citizen in the United States, you have to take an oath, a citizenship oath. And part of that oath says that you will bear arms. Well, as Seventh-day Adventists, we're non-combatants, so we don't bear arms. What do you do there? Well, we are known to be non-combatants, and we give a letter to our church members who are becoming citizens that say that they need an alternative oath as a non-combatant. And so we want you to know that you can always touch base with us, and we will get you a copy of that letter, or we'll do a copy of that letter for the church member. One more thing about the vaccine that I wanted to say. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in December said that in some cases, employers can mandate that employees take the vaccine. Now, that's a little caveat to what I said earlier when I said there haven't been mandated vaccines. It's also possible that the schools can mandate taking vaccines. Your school, your church school already wants to make sure that the children coming into school are properly vaccinated. And if you have a church school out there, you will know that children have to show their vaccination records to come into school. Now that Pfizer has been approved for 12 to 16-year-olds, it may be that schools will mandate that children have to be vaccinated. So there are some exceptions to me saying nothing's been mandated. There are some that can demand vaccination. If you want a paycheck, you have to get vaccinated. But so far, we haven't seen that from the federal or state governments.
That's quite enlightening. I'm so glad to hear that we can have a letter to represent our conviction on being non-combatant. That's so important to notice. And also, what could be the most important part of a letter dealing with the Sabbath, when we need liberty religious letters dealing with Sabbath observance? What are the major, what should be expressed there?
That's a great question. So, the first thing you need to understand is that Sabbath accommodation is not a constitutional right. What Sabbath accommodation is that it is a right under the Civil Rights Act of 1967 that allows for religious accommodation in the workplace under labor law. So when we're talking about Sabbath accommodation, we're talking about labor law and not constitutional rights. And so we have a form letter that will put forth the correct wording that you need to say in your letter to the employer for the church member. The other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to give a Bible study in the letter. So we're not trying to convince the employer that Sabbath is Sabbath. What we're trying to do is simply ask that the employer follow the labor law, which is under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, and accommodate the individual for their religious beliefs. This also might mean that the employee, the church member, might have to make some changes for the employer. They might have to go to a different job within the company. On occasion, sometimes a church member may have to be demoted to a different job. There's a little bit of give and take on both sides when it comes to Sabbath accommodation. What I want the pastors in the Southern Union to know is that you don't have to do any of this on your own. This is why we have a religious liberty department, is so that the religious liberty department, who does this every single day of the week, can help you, can help your church member, and you need to reach out to the religious liberty department, and we will get you the very specific tools that you need to help the church member. And it doesn't matter if the church member speaks English or Spanish or Creole or Portuguese or Korean. It doesn't matter. Uh, we will help any church member and any pastor who needs help for that church member. So remember that we're here. We are your toolbox to help you.
Very important. Now, in knowing where we stand in terms of our limits and rights, I'm glad you mentioned the limits, saying that it is not a constitutional right to say I need my Sabbath. So, what would be the difference as a someone who knows the law? What is the difference between a civil right and a constitutional right? Break it down for us. What's the difference, and what it implies between the two?
Sure.
If it was constitutional, what it would have implied, how different it would have been.
Right. So, that's a hard question, Pastor. So, some things are protected in our Constitution. So, when we're talking about constitutional rights, what we're talking about is the right to free speech, the right to freely exercise your religious beliefs, the right to peacefully assemble, the right to carry a gun, the right to vote, the right to be treated equally under the law. Those are all constitutional rights. When we're talking about civil rights differ, and there are 5 specific categories of civil rights. So, civil rights incorporate your race, your religion, your national origin. So, this means if you're from another country, and this is important because this month is Asian American and South Pacific Islander National Heritage Month. Let's say you're an Asian American and your company has fired you simply because you're Chinese or of Chinese descent. You're protected under the Civil Rights Act because of your national origin. The same would be true if you were only fired because you were Haitian, or if you were only fired because you were Hispanic or from a Spanish-speaking country. The others include age discrimination. So you're protected if you're 53 or older. You're protected from age discrimination. And also you're protected if you have a disability. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in the early 1990s, and that also is covered. And I have missed one, but I can't remember which one.
Gender, maybe gender.
Gender, yes.
And
Now, one of the things that is going on in the federal government right now is that we know that there is this fight over LGBTQ rights. And so, what LGBTQ rights are trying to do is they're trying to get those rights protected as civil rights as well. And so, this is part of what's going on. Gender orientation is what they sometimes refer to, different from gender, because gender in the past has simply meant male or female. Now we're saying gender orientation. It could also mean sexual orientation, in terms of, you know, that you're a man, but you're a man who has relationships with other men. So that type of protection is not yet in the civil rights, but some states are protecting those rights.
as you mentioned that, and I'm glad the implication of the LGBT community that is at times aggressive. We would like to know, as we exercise our ministry and someone comes for counseling or for a marriage and want any type of service as being part of the LGBT community, uh, am I protected against any lawsuit that would accuse me of discrimination if I upfront say I'm not dealing with a gay marriage or a service, or I'm not renting my place. I'm not doing this for two women who want counseling, two men who want counseling, or two men who want to be married, or who want a recommendation or something, some sort of the service that we offer to the community. Are we protected against lawsuits that would accuse us of discrimination?
So the question to that is mostly yes, we are. I have a little joke, and I say, what do you call a Seventh Day Adventist pastor who performs a same-sex marriage? Do you know what you call a Seventh Day Adventist pastor who performs a same-sex marriage?
Maybe Dr. Ennis knows the answer.
The answer is you call them fired.
Fired.
Fired. So within our own faith community, our religious creed is that our Seventh Day Adventist pastors do not perform same-sex marriages. A pastor can be fired by this organization for performing a same-sex marriage. There have been pastors in the Seventh Day Adventist Church who were fired for doing that. And so far, I'm happy to say that you are not going to be sued if no one has the right to sue you for refusing to marry them. Because as a pastor, you're not expected to do things outside of your religious practice. And we have a very strong, consistent understanding of sexuality and marriage between one man and one woman for a lifetime, and that those two things kind of move the church along in these issues. Now, when it comes to other issues like can someone, would you counsel a same-sex couple? That's a question that I can't answer. I think that you can refuse to counsel a same-sex couple, but I have yet to hear of any pastor being fired who went ahead and counseled a same-sex couple.
But you got the records of pastors in the Seventh-day Adventist Church who have been fired for marrying
Yes,
same-sex couples.
yes, yeah,
It is very important to know because with the conspiracy theories that are said that we have embraced certain things because of your department. They accuse you. They say because of your department, because of we don't have that freedom. So it was very enlightening. I may have one or two more questions, but I don't want to hold the panel on my own. I want to turn over to Dr. Ennis if he has one or two questions. If there's anybody else on the platform who has questions about our limits and our rights as pastors when it comes to religious liberty. So I want to open up. We have few minutes. We have maybe 15 minutes left, so we can ask one or two more questions. I can return for more, but let me turn over to our beloved Dr. Ennis.
Hey, Amira, thank you. There was I was talking to myself with my mic muted, of course. So I was in the green room listening to a conversation, very enlightening. Now, I think most people were not aware that Sabbath accommodation on the job is not a constitutionally protected right. And so I would like to kind of zero in on that a little bit more for some further dialogue, in that since it's not a constitutionally protected right, um, how do we explain that as non-legal professionals, pastors, to church members? What kind of illustrations or verbiage would you advise a pastor to use, a non-legal trained pastor, to explain that very important difference between what is a constitutional right, and you mentioned that this comes under the labor laws, because I think most people, myself included, up until probably right now, thought this was a constitutionally protected right. I got 2 requests in the last 2 weeks, week and a half, for letters like this, which I wrote. And I haven't done one in over a year. And because right now there is a shortage, so to speak, a mysterious shortage of labor. If people are saying they have work and they can't find people to do the work, and then so states are moving toward ending the unemployment benefits that have been extended, so that to force people back into the workplace. And so while that is happening, you have Seventh-day Adventists who are being called upon, and jobs that they had before and during the pandemic, all of a sudden they're being called upon to work on Saturdays. And now I've gotten 2 requests for letters in the last week and a half from my members, and I haven't done one in probably a year and a half, and 2 in the last week and a half. So how do we explain it? Because we're not lawyers. Talk to us about that.
That's a great question. So yes, we are going to see people returning back to work. First of all, I always tell people it's best to look for a job that does not have Sabbath work hours. Now, that's not always possible. I know that. I live in the real world and I understand. But what you want to do is you want to let people know that your availability is from Sunday through Friday evening. You want to let people know if someone, let the church members know that they're available every day of the week. It's just that you can't work from sundown Friday to sundown Sabbath. And so, but you can work, if you work a night shift, you can certainly work a Saturday night shift. You can work Sundays, you can work Fridays if you work the day shift. So there's really no day that an Adventist can't work, but there is a time period that an Adventist
Very good. Yes.
And so I think it's important when you go and you're explaining to church members, you want to be honest, but you don't want to walk into a job interview without knowing anything about the job and say, do you have a job for a Sabbath keeper? Because they're going to say, what? So when you're doing the letter for the church member, you have to explain to the church member that you don't have to explain the difference between constitutional rights or labor law rights. You don't have to explain that. You simply have to let the church member know that there is a labor law that covers them. And this is part of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the EEOC. Most people know this because they know that you can't be discriminated against if you're black, or if you're older, or if you're a male or a female, those kinds of things. But they don't realize that the EEOC rules also cover religion. So just let them know that those EEOC rules also cover religion. And what you do when you write your letter is you simply say, I'm writing on behalf of this church member. This church member is a member in good standing. They observe the Sabbath from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, and that during this time they need to be sure that their schedule will allow them to be off, but that they're available all other times during the week. And the good thing about that is they're even available on Sunday. So it's not that they're asking for the weekend off. Sometimes you need to say that. Depending on the job, you need to say this person isn't asking for the weekend off. They simply ask for the time between sundown Friday and sundown Saturday. The other thing you need to be specific on is to specifically ask for the accommodation in harmony with the EEOC guidelines and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as amended. Now, that's a lot to remember. Again, you don't have to remember any of that, because we have a sample letter that you can ask for. You just email us, where if you're a pastor in the Southern Union, you just email religiousunion@southernunion.com. And there we go. That will get you to our office. And since we have this up on the thing, if you will scroll back up, probably the person that will take your Sabbath problem is the gentleman in the purple shirt. That is Pastor Kevin James, and he does most of the Sabbath accommodation problems in the Southern Union. And when his plate overfloweth, then I pick up and I come in and act as his backup. So again, if you're having a Sabbath accommodation problem, if your church member needs something, reach out to us and we will help you. So we're here to help and to explain and to maneuver through. And the other thing that I would like to say, it's important that pastors let their church members know on a regular basis. And I very often say the best way to do this is to put a bulletin announcement in to let them know if you're having religious accommodation problems, let the church know early. So if you're waiting until Friday afternoon and you're supposed to work that Sabbath, you're not going to get accommodated in 12 hours. It's just, you're probably not even going to be able to get a hold of us, because we're probably going to be traveling someplace to preach on Sabbath. We're on the road on Fridays. So our best success is when the church member reaches out to the pastor or to us early, as soon as they know. As soon as they know. They need to pick up the phone and call you. You need to pick up the phone and call us, so that we can help you lay out the foundational evidence that you need to get the accommodation started.
All right.
Now,
so now, go ahead.
And this might answer your next question. I mentioned earlier, there's give and take. So what is the give and take? It may be that you are in a work scenario, or the church member is in a work scenario, where the employer cannot accommodate the church member. There are some scenarios like that. Okay? If accommodating you, by you I mean the church member, if accommodating the church member means that the employer has to pay overtime, they don't have to accommodate you. If accommodating you means that they have to hire another person, they don't have to accommodate you. Anything
Wow.
that creates an undue hardship on the employment or the employer or the operations of the employment does not have to be accommodated. So this is give and take.
Wow. Wow. That's important.
That is very important because not everybody's going to get accommodated. And if you have a labor union in your shop where you work, if the employee, if the church member works somewhere where they have to bid their days off, and if they have to bid and they only get their day off according to seniority, the Supreme Court in the 1970s, in a case called TWA versus Hardison, the Supreme Court ruled that a religious accommodation does not mean that the CBA, that's the collective bargaining agreement, does not mean that the CBA has to be violated. So if you don't have enough seniority to get Sabbath off by bidding, they cannot necessarily just forget about the bidding standards in the company and give you Sabbath off. So you have to have your seniority to get Sabbath off. We have a lot of problems in the Postal Service and the U.S. Postal Service because of that, because you always have to bid your days off in the post office.
Okay. So recently, maybe in the last 3 or so years, Seventh-day Adventist, I'm kind of foggy on this in terms of my memory, a case went to the Supreme Court and he won the judgment. Now, just give us the broad outlines of that particular case, the judgment, and how is that different from what we're talking about here? Because I believe it had to do with Sabbath. So, in other words, when can a Seventh-day Adventist sue?
Right. So let's back up a little bit. The case you're talking about is a case from the Southern Union. This is a case that we worked in my office. Actually, we've had 2 Supreme Court cases in the last 4 years go to the Supreme Court. Both of them came out of my office. Both of them Pastor Kevin James worked on, and he did a great job with his cases. But in both cases, the Supreme Court denied taking the case. So it's not that we lost, it's that the Supreme Court just did not take the case. The first one is Daryl Patterson versus Walgreens. And then that's the case you're referring to.
Right.
We waited for, I think we waited 3 years for the Supreme Court to decide whether or not they were going to take that case. And in the end, they decided not to take it. And then we had another case that we filed in March of this year. The Supreme Court again decided that they were not going to take that one as well. We're kind of disappointed that the Supreme Court didn't take these cases for a number of reasons. The first reason is that when it comes to religious rights in the workplace, it really is a win-win for religious liberty, because your religious rights in the workplace, when it comes to Sabbath accommodation, it has nothing to do with this overall fight that we're seeing in society between the LGBTQ community and the religious community. And this is one of those cases where you can side on behalf of religious accommodation without violating LGBTQ rights or issues. And we thought that would have been a good thing that the Supreme Court wanted to do, but apparently they didn't. So that's okay. I'm not on the court. I'm not part of the justice system there. So obviously my opinion differs from theirs. The Daryl Patterson, the Walmart case, and I don't know how much time I have. Not Walmart, Walgreens. Tell me if I need to cut it off. Daryl Patterson's case took 11 years. 11 years to get to the Supreme Court. So, he had originally had a Sabbath problem. We got him accommodated. In getting him accommodated, he was demoted from an assistant manager position to a lower position. Then he became a trainer in their training center. And then they gave him another Sabbath accommodation problem. They wanted him to train on Sabbath. And this is the case that came up to the Supreme Court. He found somebody to cover his Sabbath shift, but the employer wouldn't allow them to cover because they wanted to force him to work on Sabbath. So he didn't work. He ended up not working on Sabbath, and instead he did the seminar, he did the training on Sunday, just like he had offered. But after he did the training on Sunday, come Monday morning, the company fired him.
Wow.
Yeah. So we claimed in that particular instance that there was no undue hardship on the company. They had the people trained by the beginning of the next work week. And it was simply what they wanted versus what he needed as his religious accommodation. But apparently the Supreme Court did not, they didn't see an interest in re-examining undue hardship. So again, he lost at the in the Florida appeals court. He lost. But remember, when you go up again in an appeals court, most appeals court panels are just 3 judges. And in that particular case, we had one judge we knew was going to rule against us. A lot of times your judges are going to rule against you because who they elect, who was elected, whether they're big business or employee related judges. This particular judge never voted for an employee. He was able to convince one other judge not to vote. So there you go, your 2-to-1 split on a 3-judge panel, and you lose it. So yeah, it was sad, but we're glad that we were there to defend our church member.
I have another question to segue just a little bit. We are living in a time that's unprecedented with respect to the manifestation of the graces of the gospel in the context of what's happening in our streets. We have had a lot of killings, extrajudicial killings by law enforcement officers. We're having an assault on the Voting Rights Act all across this country. More and more as Seventh-day Adventist pastors, especially we who are people of color, we are finding ourselves being not only preachers but advocates, community advocates. That's one of the reasons why IPCE was founded last year. It came on the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, and so the mission of this institute is to teach, equip, mentor our colleagues in how do we provide more effective pastoral community engagement. Many of our churches are either very little known or virtually unknown in the places where they are located, and it's because of the detachment of the pastors, because these are not things that people learn in undergrad and seminary, to come out here and be advocates, community organizers. How do you turn out the vote, these kind of things. In fact, if you really want to be honest about it, our church, Seventh-day Adventist Church, pretty much find ways to discourage you from trying to do those things, even the things that Jesus did with respect to looking out for the least of these. But we read somewhere that Christ's method alone gives true success in reaching the people. And he mingled, he did all the other stuff, he ministered to their needs, and then the last thing he did was say, follow me. We believe we should look at perfect strangers we have done nothing for and say, follow me. And they're looking at, what? Who are you? I don't know you like that. And so as a result, our evangelism doesn't work like it should, and we are unknown. The Baptist people, they're out there doing stuff that we benefit from with civil rights and these kind of things. So I've set the stage. What I want you to speak to for me right now is going back to the theme of the program this evening, what are our rights and our limitations with respect to advocacy as Seventh-day Adventist pastors? And when I say advocacy, let's just be blunt. We can't do that without engaging at some level politics. So we're talking about elected officials or people who need to be elected or people who need to be de-elected, if that's a word, or unelected, or
voted
whatever.
out.
Yeah.
Voted out.
Okay. So we're seeing an assault on voting rights that's specifically targeted to the people of color. I mean, it says, Stevie Wonder could see that. So, and that wasn't a statement against people with visual disabilities, just talking about blatant it is. And what are our rights, what are our limitations as Seventh-day Adventist pastors who get involved with ground level movements to help people recognize that let's fight back. They cannot steal our vote. Let's get out the vote. Talk to us about that.
Well, in the minute and a half I have left, so
You have
let
three
me first.
minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes. Okay, good. So let me first say that when it comes to advocacy and being known in our community, I think a lot of times we miss the opportunity of what Sabbath blessings can come to us when we do something other than dress up on Sabbath and go and worship. And so we have this very important day, which is Sabbath for us, where everyone else is out in their community, and we have gone into our church and we have decided that we are going to just have our church. And that is a
Amen.
blessing for many of us. But sometimes,
Sometimes.
maybe we can get a blessing on Sabbath from being outside our church.
Uh-huh.
And maybe we can get a blessing on Sabbath from wearing blue jeans
Uh-huh.
and ministering to people on Sabbath. You know, I tell people that when you when you disengage from your community because all you want to do is worship in your church, you are doing yourself a disservice. And so it's a disservice for every church member who is sitting in the pew on Sabbath and only does that every single Sabbath. Jesus was not sitting in the temple every Sabbath. It's why he got in trouble with the Pharisees. So if you want to be like Jesus, you need to get in trouble with the Pharisees of your church.
Wow.
Amen.
And you need to encourage your church members to get in trouble with the Pharisees in the church.
So that
So
we're clear. So there is no prohibition legally or otherwise. And I want the Seventh Day Adventist pastors and members who are watching this right now or will watch this 5 years from now because on our YouTube channel to understand very clearly. There is no restriction about getting involved with legal, civil issues of the day.
yes, so what I would say is my approach, and we it's very hard in the religious liberty world for us to separate the politics that are incorporated into religious liberty. Just it's how the world is right now, especially when religious liberty is being so politicized. But
Mm-hmm.
what we stand to do, or what we aim to do in the religious liberty department, is that we aim to approach these subjects from a bipartisan stand. So we know that certain political parties take some things in one direction and other political parties take things in another direction. My my warning to you is that neither political party is the party of God.
Mm-hmm.
God is not a Republican and God is not a Democrat. So
Wow.
when we work from this stance of advocacy, we have to realize that we need to work with Republicans and with Democrats. We need to work as people who can be a bridge to bring those two opposing views together because we're so polarized now as a society. And I'm going to tell you, we're polarized as a church.
Oh yeah.
We have regional conference churches that meet on one side of town, and we have state conference churches that meet on the other side of town. And
Mm-hmm.
ne'er do the two get together and even have a picnic. Tell me the last time any pastor got their church to have a picnic with the other church in town, on a Sabbath afternoon. Tell me.
I've never heard of
So,
it.
yeah. so so I think that the first thing we have to do is we have to reach across our church boundaries and shake hands across the aisle with our other church brothers and sisters. And there's good to be found in numbers. And if you're a little church that only has 30 members, but you have to remember that there's another church on the other side of town that might have 150 members. How can the two churches come together and get something done together for the good of our community in a way that's not seen as being political, but simply advocacy for people who have less than other people.
Now,
And whether that be Black people or Asian American people or Spanish speaking people or, Haitian people who bring cashew gravy to potluck, all of these things work together and make us stronger when we're unified. And I think that the thing that we need to do is, as a church, first we have to reach across our own church fences and unify together and then go forward. And the thing is, if you reach out to the other church in your town, whether it be the state church or the regional church, it doesn't matter. If you reach out to them and sit down and talk it out and tell them what your concern is and listen to what their concern is, I think we'd have a whole lot more going for us, because we could help our communities and our community leaders more by showing a united front that isn't just about Black Lives Matter or, QAnon issues kind of fighting each other. So we have to kind of make that happen within our own faith community first before we can step outside that area.
Now, Amira, I'm not so sure I would holistically agree that we have to do it first, because then what that does, it sets up an order that then I'm placing myself to follow. Okay, so until this happens, I can't do that.
Right.
I have found as an advocate that sometimes it's quicker, more effective, more meaningful for me to work with a Baptist minister, because we are already on the same page, as opposed to trying to convince a colleague of the same denomination because he might be of a different color and he refuses to believe that voting rights really matter to people of color. Right. So instead of me, I'm going to say bluntly, wasting my time. I only have X amount of years in that district. That's the limitation of our system. That Baptist guy, he's going to be there as long as he does what they want him to do. He's going to be the pastor. But we in the Adventist church, we're on a term limit, so to speak. And so by the time we have that conversation that you're talking about, we're gone. So what we seek to do is, who's doing something right now in our city, in our community, and we seek to partner with them. The problem is sometimes there are administrators, there are other colleagues who are watching, church members who don't understand that they cannot escape the reality of politics and everything, including the price of milk. And so, but right now we have work to do, because an election is coming, and all these people have been kicked off the voters list. So that's a conversation that we have to do while we're doing work, as opposed to we got to do this conversation first.
Correct. And let's back up and say, but if you ignore that other conversation, and maybe what we should say is you need to do it consecutively together. Right. If you ignore that conversation, then the new guy coming in has to start it from scratch. So every time you build, you are putting a layer in for the guy who's coming after you, so that it doesn't matter who comes in after you and who comes in after the other guy on the other side, because what you do as a pastor, you're talking to the other pastor, but both pastors are going to leave eventually. You're the conduits that are going to connect the members together, because it's the members that live in that community. And I know a lot of times you might pastor a place and live 45 miles away from it. So I had a pastor who had a church in Altamont Springs, Florida. And that was the last place I preached before the pandemic hit last March in person. I preached, but not in person. And we went and we visited the chief of police, one of the city councilmen, and the mayor of Altamont Springs. And what we found out was that we didn't have a single church member who went to that church that lived in that city.
That's not uncommon. That's a reality.
All they did was go there on Sabbath and worship.
Community church.
So there is nothing a church pastor can do if he doesn't have members who live in that community to make a difference in that community.
Mm-hmm.
So you can
Indeed.
do all the meetings with the mayor that you want, all the
Mm-hmm.
meetings with the city police chief that you want, but if you don't have a single congregant living in that community, you're just blowing hot air.
And that's what we
You
need our pastors and our members to understand. That's why we created this forum, because we want folk, number one, to understand that it is needed, it is okay to do it, and it's just a matter of us providing an educational platform such as IPCE to teach us how to go about doing it, because it needs to get done.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
My sister lives in a very small town in Wrangell, Alaska, and the town knows all the church members there. But on Sabbath, if the town is having a festival, the church has a booth in the festival on Sabbath. Um, they're giving away Big Franks or hot dogs, or they're giving out steps to Christ, or they're doing blood pressure checks, or any little thing that, hey, we're the Seventh Day Adventist Church. We're not just over in church during your street fair. We're here in the fair ministering. You know, and I know some of the saints will think, a fair is not a place to, keep Sabbath properly. But, you know, how else are you going to minister in your community if you refuse to congregate with the sinners or the non-Sabbatarians? So
That's
it's
right.
it's you just have to step forward in faith and try to show people, what would Jesus do? What
Mm.
would Jesus do?
That's a key question. Mm. What would
Indeed.
Jesus do?
In a future program, we will probably be reaching out to you to bring you back to be a part of a panel, because one of the things that we're talking about on the executive board for IPCE is when these different things, the issues that we have highlighted here today, break out in the community. One of the things our millennials, Generation Zs are looking for, they're asking, where's the church? Where's the statement from the General Conference President? Where's the statement from the NAD? We started IPCE with one of the foundational principles being, why ask them for a statement? They don't live in these streets. What about the pastor who the conference sent to live in that neighborhood, or the pastor of the church in that city? Why doesn't he or she know how to put a statement out, how to call a press conference, how to release a well-written statement that meets legal muster and doesn't violate church protocols and whatnot? Because if the NAD puts a statement out about something that's happening in city A, they don't know who the NAD is. They never heard of an NAD, but that pastor. So we're going to put together a conglomeration of presenters, yourself included, to come back one of these days and to talk about that, because I think it's an opportunity lost and wasted when we allow our young people. I get what they're asking for. What they're really looking for is action from their church. And if they were getting action from their local church, they wouldn't be trying to look up to the NAD and the GC for some action. So we got to turn these pastors loose, but they got to be trained.
And we have a denominational structure that provides assistance on all of these things. When you want to do a statement in your local community on something, talk to your conference communication director. Those individuals are trained in PR issues. They're trained in the best way to put out a press release. They're trained in the best way to mention a press release, but also keep in mind that we have to have a balance, because we don't want anyone to think that they're a cowboy out there riding in the Wild
Correct.
West by themselves. Also remember that sometimes what we do affects other things within the denomination. So there are times when we specifically in North America don't say something about what's going on in another part of the world. Why do we do that? Because that division has asked the North American division not to say anything. They're trying to handle a crisis or handle the situation without the U.S. having input into it. And so we tend to think that we're the United States and we're the best and we're going to tell everybody what to do. But we also have to continue to remember that we have a balancing act to do for that. Again, going back to our millennials and our Gen Zers, what I tell people is that when your community knows who you are as a church, when they know you, not just drive by your church, but when they know who you are, who you love, who you stand for, who you want to share with other people, when they know you as being followers of Christ, then when they truly know you and have a friendship with you, you don't always have to make a statement because people are going to know your attitude already. It's like when you have a relationship with your friend or your colleague and friend doesn't always have to say something about an issue. You know them well enough to know how they're going to react. And so we used to sing a song a long time ago, do you know a Christian, you're a sermon in shoes. If we're all sermon in shoes, a lot of times we don't have to put out a statement on something. But I will say this, the church as a whole, especially from the North American Division standpoint, the North American Division has been very sensitive to the issue of statements of recent, let's say the last 10 years. And I have seen more statements being released from the NAD on issues of justice and issues of injustice, issues of inclusion or exclusion. I've seen more statements being put forth from the NAD over the last 10 or 15 years than I've ever seen in the lifetime of the church. And so I think that the church leadership itself is cognizant of these issues, but there are some times when a conference might not want to put out a statement for other reasons than what you might think you want to do. And so remember that as a pastor, you have to be careful because you're representing the church, but you have to balance how you do it, because when you're representing the church, you can't simply speak your own politics. You can do it privately, but you can't do it. Your own politics can't be the politics of the church. And so that's where we have to be careful in the way we handle our local community politics and political issues that come up. And we forget that, yes, we might have a personal statement we want to make, but as church leaders, we have to be cautious. And I will say that there is a great webinar, I think, at the NAD's communications site on what the best way to handle your social media site as a pastor. And I highly encourage you to check that out, and just a refresher course of things you should and shouldn't post to social media, how to approach certain subjects, and have a balanced approach to ministry and community outreach.
I appreciate that. Now, and I agree with you on the fact that there are more statements coming out of the NAD. The problem is, who are those statements for? Because again, the NAD only has the capacity to speak to church members. And the church members are not typically the ones who are being affected by the issues that we're talking about. Getting murdered in the streets. We're talking about a community that a church is located in. They never heard of the NAD. Unless they become Seventh-day Adventists, no matter how many Adventists, they know NAD is irrelevant. Because NAD is not going to put a statement out on CNN or ABC. So they're not going to see that statement. So the link to the community and the denomination is that local church and that local pastor. And that's where we're coming from. So we're talking about in terms of, yes, probably more pastors don't even know that their communication director from their own conference, as part of their job descriptions, to help them formulate a statement. The point we're making is the statement, however it's done, or whenever it's done, or for whatever purpose it's done, we're just saying it needs to come through that local entity, because that's where the people are who are being affected by it.
Correct. And it's always appropriate. it's always appropriate for the local pastor to push the statement that's coming out and to say, we have adopted here in our local community this statement. And I think we put out a statement on the Asian American hate crimes. It's perfectly appropriate for a pastor to push that statement out on their social media page, or to put something up on their church billboard that says, Jesus said, "Love Asian Americans too," or whatever it's going to be. So it's my recommendation is, when you see a statement that you feel like needs to be pushed more in your local community, take that statement and own it as a church, because the NAD has given it to you to own. Own the statement.
That's right.
Post the statement. Write a letter to the editor of your local paper and say, I'm the pastor of the local Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Say that again. Because
write a letter to your...
That's what we want our pastors to hear. That this is why we're having this conversation. Because again, if the pastors this entity, this institute is geared toward the pastor. Because if the pastor doesn't do it, it's probably not going to get done.
Right.
So if you would just refresh that statement.
Right. Own the statement that the church puts out. If it's from the NAD, you can own it. This is an approved statement. Write the letter to the religion editor if it's a religion issue. If it's we've had this issue of voting laws. It's a highly contentious issue. Does the state have the right to make sure that people are voting are legitimate voters? We did a whole program on the Justice and Conscience Counsel 2 or 3 weeks ago. I did a whole program on Jim Crow laws, explaining what Jim Crow laws were. I pulled in a professor from Oakwood University to give a seminar on that. I asked the state representative that got arrested, Representative Cannon. I reached out to her office. I said, "Can you come on our program?" She said, "I'd love to come on the program." She was on our program. She got arrested for knocking on the governor's door to ask about that law being signed. So, it's okay to talk about these justice and conscience issues, and we do in the Religious Liberty Department, because that's the public affairs part of what we do. And again, you have a lot, as a pastor, you have a lot of resources. We don't expect you to know everything. We don't expect you to do everything. But when you have a great idea, or you want to share what your church has said about, and I keep referring to the Asian American hate crimes that have gone on. When you want to share what your church has said about the Asian hate crimes, own the church's statement and put it out. Own it. Post it to your social media. Send it into your editor of your paper and say, "I'm the pastor from the Seventh-day Adventist Mount Zion Church, and we're concerned as a Seventh-day Adventist church." And then, restate the statement. They don't need to know that statement came from Dan Weber, or that the statement came from Alex Bryant. You own it. Give it. Share it. Put it out there. So a lot of times we think we have to reinvent the wheel. No, the wheel is out there. Just take it and use it.
We have to push the wheel.
Yes, we have to push the wheel.
Push, yes.
Put some gas in the car and move it.
That's right.
The thing about our millennials and especially our millennial pastors, and we say our millennial pastors, but let's face it, millennials have children. They're not young. I hate to say this to millennials. We're not really young anymore. The Gen Zers are young.
They are not. They are not.
Don't think that you're saying, the church, you're in a position to do something, and you're in a position to use the resources that the church has given you to do something. We know you are younger than older people. You do have energy. You do have new ideas that you want to share and use and experiment with. But use the toolbox and use the connections that your conference has for you to help make you a better pastor. That's what this is about. We're all in this together to make the experience better, not just for pastors, but for church members as well. And so, from the union level where I sit to your conference level to your local church level, where you have different toolboxes for different things. And you as a pastor don't need to feel like you're out there alone. Reach out to people, and your conference and your union, we can make things happen fast, and we can help you get things done fast. So don't think that we're going to necessarily slow you down. Sometimes you might just want to bounce an idea off of somebody and say, is this a good idea or a bad idea? So do it. Talk to people, bounce ideas off. But use the resources that our denomination has for you.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you
I
so
think,
much.
yes.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Ennis, I wanted to say today we made great use of our union religious liberty director. I was blessed. As I'm about to wrap up to conclude, I will let Dr. Ennis say the word of conclusion to end and as our leader here. But I want to thank you. You covered so many things. We could see our rights. You
Indeed.
told us we got so many rights, and I was happy to also understand we also have some limitations. When I understood that I cannot get my Sabbath off if it cause undue hardship to the company, and that was enlightening. And also I've heard you in other platform telling those people who want their Sabbath to also be Christians at the workplace. Be a Christian, show Christ, and Christ which will reveal integrity. And if your boss can't do without you because you have such integrity, um, you will have the upper hand when you say, okay, I'll have to leave if you don't accommodate me in such a way. So it's so much inclusive when you also ask the pastors to follow Christ, even if they may be in trouble with the Pharisees among us, whether in the church, wherever. So this was rich and valuable. I want to thank you, Amira. I want to thank you for being there. As you were saying, use our resources. We were glad we invited you as our main resource when it comes to religious liberty. And it was very informative. And I'm glad also it's just the beginning. Dr. Ennis already said he will invite you again, and you have said something that it's a takeaway. At your website and other things, we can contact you for letters, for other things that we can get resources, and it's right there. Thank you, Dr. Ennis. I want to thank you. You've been such a great resource to all pastors, and people will watch it. We will see, we'll understand some of the limitations we have as we do so, and many of the rights we have, and we do have a voice. Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Ennis, for allowing this to be such a very, very informative moment for our pastors with what you do in IPCE. And again, Amira, thank you. May God bless you.
Thank you,
Thank
Amira.
you.
God bless. And thanks
Thank
to
you.
everybody who tuned in today. If you have any questions for us, use our website. There's a comment feature there, or send us a message through our Facebook group or page that you're part of. God bless, and we see you for the next program in just a few weeks. Thank you so very much. Bye bye.